What if everything you thought you knew about the Chargers being right there this season is actually a complete illusion? And what if the uncomfortable truth is that the Houston Texans have quietly become the kind of team that doesn't just beat you, but exposes you, dissects you, and leaves you looking unprepared in front of the entire football world? Because that's exactly what this matchup is threatening to do. And the scariest part is that everyone on that NFL Live panel basically admitted it without even realizing how brutal the message really was. Because when you strip away the politeness, the jokes, the laughter, and the casual tone, what they were really saying is that the Chargers might walk into this game already defeated, outmatched at the line of scrimmage, mentally stressed by pressure they can't block, and staring down a Texans defense that doesn't just slow teams down but suffocates them into mistakes. And once that reality sets in, everything about Justin Herbert, the Chargers' identity and their playoff hopes, suddenly feels fragile in a way fans are not ready to admit. This whole conversation started sounding lighthearted, but beneath the surface, it was a warning siren. Because when analysts start throwing around phrases like best front in football, elite pressure with only 3 or 4 rushers, and defensive backs who can sit back and feast on mistakes, that's not hype. That's a blueprint for disaster for an offense that already struggles up front. And the scary part is that everyone at that table knows it. This isn't about disrespect. This is about inevitability. And once you hear it laid out the way they did, it becomes almost impossible to unhear. This is the moment where the Chargers are being put on notice, and the Texans are being quietly crowned as something far more dangerous than people want to admit. What we're really talking about here is a Texans defense that statistically lives in elite company, being compared to units like the 2023 Browns, the 2014 Seahawks, the 2011 Steelers, and when names like that start getting tossed around, you're no longer in hype territory, you're in historical context. That's where this conversation shifted from casual to serious, because suddenly it's not about potential anymore, it's about proof, and that's exactly why this matchup has exploded into one of the most fascinating and uncomfortable conversations of the week. Before we go any further, if you're feeling that tension already, if you're sensing how big this game really is, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a like, because this is where the real breakdown starts, and you're not going to want to miss how this story unfolds. Now let's talk about what actually makes this Texans defense so terrifying, because it's not just talent, it's structure, discipline, and control. When analysts start talking about a defense that can rush 3 or 4 and still get home, that's the nightmare scenario for any quarterback, especially one like Justin Herbert, who has already shown vulnerability when pressure collapses the pocket faster than expected. The Texans don't need to blitz recklessly. They don't need to gamble. They don't need to expose themselves, because their front does the job on its own. That changes everything. It means more bodies in coverage, more eyes on the quarterback, and more opportunities for defenders like Derek Stingley Jr. to make plays on the ball. And that's where the fear really sets in. Because we're not talking about hypothetical playmakers, we're talking about a secondary where multiple guys have multiple interceptions, a group that thrives when quarterbacks are forced into uncomfortable decisions. Justin Herbert knows this all too well, because he's already lived the nightmare of throwing 4 interceptions against this same group, and that memory doesn't just disappear. It sits in the back of your mind. It speeds up your internal clock. It makes you hesitate just long enough for pressure to arrive. The panel didn't say it outright, but the implication was clear. If Herbert doesn't protect the football, this game could spiral fast. And when you add in the fact that the Chargers' offensive line has been a weakness, especially against dominant fronts, it starts to feel less like a matchup and more like a test of survival. The Texans aren't just good up front. They're disciplined, they're patient, and they understand how to let quarterbacks beat themselves. That's why the conversation kept coming back to how dangerous it is when a defense can rush 4 and drop 7, or even rush 3 and still get pressure. That's when passing lanes disappear, when throwing windows shrink, and when even elite quarterbacks start forcing balls they shouldn't. On the other side of the ball, the conversation shifts to C.J. Stroud, and this is where the nuance really matters, because even though he's been incredible, the analysts didn't shy away from pointing out that he's human. They acknowledged that he had moments of inconsistency, especially throwing outside the numbers, and that there are ways to challenge him if you can take away the middle of the field. That's where the Chargers' defense comes into play, because structurally, they're built to defend those outside throws well, and that gives them a theoretical path to slowing Houston down. But here's the tension: theory versus reality. The Chargers might have the scheme, but do they have the consistency? Can they execute it for 4 quarters? Because as was pointed out, when this defense fails to hold up, everything collapses. We've seen 2 versions of this Chargers team. One where the defense holds and Herbert can operate within a manageable game, and another where the defense can't get stops and suddenly the quarterback is forced to play hero ball. And that's where games swing wildly. That's where turnovers happen. That's where narratives change. The discussion subtly made it clear that this game could come down to which defense imposes its will first. And right now, the Texans look like the group more capable of doing that. There was even surprise among the panel that nobody picked the Chargers, and that in itself says everything. When analysts expect at least one contrarian pick and don't get it, that tells you the confidence gap is real. This isn't a coin flip in their minds. This is a game where the Texans' strengths align perfectly with the Chargers' weaknesses. And when you zoom out even further, the implications get even heavier. This isn't just about one game. This is about playoff positioning, perception, and momentum. This is about whether the Chargers are actually contenders or just another team surviving on talent without consistency. It's about whether the Texans are announcing themselves as a defensive powerhouse that nobody wants to face. And the way this conversation unfolded, it quietly screamed that Houston is ahead of schedule, and the Chargers are still searching for stability. The subtext was unavoidable. When you hear analysts talk about how a defense can dictate everything, how it can erase strengths and force quarterbacks into their worst tendencies, that's not optimism for the opponent. That's a warning label. The Texans have the kind of defense that doesn't just win games, it defines them. And if Justin Herbert can't stay clean, can't stay composed, and can't protect the football, then all the talent in the world won't save the Chargers from being overwhelmed. That's why this matchup feels heavier than a typical regular season game. It feels like a measuring stick. It feels like a moment where narratives get locked in. Either the Chargers prove they can overcome a suffocating defense, or the Texans prove that their dominance up front isn't hype, it's identity. And based on everything that was said, everything that was emphasized, and everything that was quietly implied, the balance of belief is leaning hard in one direction. The Texans aren't just being respected, they're being feared. And when a defense earns that kind of reputation, games stop being about strategy and start becoming about survival.